What's up everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be comparing the A7R V against the A7R IV and the A7R III and figure out how the noise renders at the various ISOs that you may find yourself shooting at. Now before we get into this technical test here, I've been doing these comparisons or evaluations, and these are not scientific by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not putting out little scientific cards to shoot. I'm literally just thinking through real life scenarios. Maybe you shoot flat lays, maybe you shoot low light things. And I created a little scene behind me here that we're gonna look at today, and we'll just see how it goes. So if you're looking for a super technical analysis, you are on the wrong channel, and I am not the right person to give you that information. However, if you're looking for understanding how these photos actually render and how the noise actually looks on these photos at various ISOs, I think you're gonna be pleasantly surprised today. Before we go any further though, I want us to understand what is happening that creates noise. You know, photography is all about sacrifice. We have three things that we are using to contribute to our exposure, and it is the aperture, which is the opening and closing of the lens blades. We have the shutter, which is the opening and closing of the curtain in front of the sensor. And we've got the ISO, which is how sensitive the sensor is to light. So you turn your ISO up, it makes the sensor more sensitive. But every one of those comes with a trade-off. As you have to close your aperture to accommodate for really bright light, you might find yourself losing some depth of field. As you increase your shutter, or let's go the other way around, as you decrease your shutter, you might find yourself getting blur, especially if you're shooting handheld. If you increase your shutter, you may find blues get crazy saturated, especially if you're an outdoor shooter. And if you shoot your ISO very low, you have no noise, which I think is always ideal. Or as you crank it up, you start to introduce noise, and that's the noise we're talking about today. A lot of people are super critical of the A7R series because it produces quite a bit of noise, and there's actually a physical reason for that. Let's talk about that reason. In here, inside of the A7R cameras, or any camera for that matter, you have this sensor, and hopefully that was in focus. If you have this sensor that is the equivalent of a 35mm, right? So it's got a physical size, an X by Y. With that physical size, the more pixels you cram into that, the less light every pixel can capture. You could shoot with, say, an A7 III or an A7 IV and shoot with the A7R IV or the R5 and get totally different situations in the shadows. You will 100% find that you get way more noise in the shadows in low light on the R series because there's way more pixels. Therefore, every pixel is bringing in less light. But of course, as I said, photography is sacrifice. What you're gaining with the R series is way more megapixels, which lets you crop and punch in much further and deeper. I do a lot of commercial work, and therefore when I'm shooting flat lays or anything like that, I need options to move that focal point around. I can't compose every single thing the way a customer or a client wants every single time. So when I shoot a nice wide flat lay but have the ability to punch in, for me it's a huge win. I love shooting the R series, but I have to keep that ISO low for the commercial work that I do. So that's just a small example of the kind of sacrifices we're constantly making. We're tweaking the settings of the aperture and the ISO and the shutter. We're trading off cropping against shooting in low light, or we're getting great low light results, but we're not able to crop as much. It's all just about finding what you need and what works for you. Regarding the parameters of this test, how I did this is I set up this little scene behind me, and then I put the tripod right here with the 35 GM on the tripod on every camera. And then I just went through a series of photos matching all the settings across three cameras. I shot everything at f8 so that this plane would be fairly in focus from the front to the back. Think of this as being shot in ISO priority. So we're gonna jump into Lightroom now. We're gonna take a look at how these photos compare. As we go through every ISO setting, the A7R V will be on the left, the A7R IV will be in the middle, and the A7R III will be on the right of your screen. And we'll do a little comparison across all three, but I really wanna show the one-to-one of the A7R V and the A7R IV because they're the same megapixels. I think it's a very fair comparison. So let's go ahead and jump in. So we're gonna establish a baseline here by looking at the ISO 100, which is the lowest native setting. Here is the A7R V, and I'm just gonna punch in right here because you get some shadow and you get some light, and you can see very well how sharp and clean this image is. On the A7R IV, I would say it's just as good as the A7R V. You see everything's nice, clean, and sharp. And then the A7R III, as I punch in here, everything looks identical, beautiful, clean, and sharp. A lot of that is that GM lens. That 35 is something else. It's my favorite lens in my kit most days of the week. But as I look at these three photos here, I see three very amazing, capable, hardworking cameras. And even though the A7R III is pretty old at this point, I mean 2 generations old, it is still an incredible camera. I even know people that still shoot on the A7R II, and they have fantastic photos. This truly is an incredible system by Sony. We're not gonna spend a lot of time on 100. It's so clean. As we look at 200, we're gonna see very little noise starting to creep in. If you look here, and now we are very deep pixel peeping here. We're starting to get a little bit of noise in the shadows. I mean, very little on the A7R V. As we look at the A7R IV, again, I would never be punched in this far, so it's almost irrelevant as I look at the noise at this level. But it is an incredibly clean file at 200. If I go to 400, which is where we're heading now, we look at the A7R V. Again, look how deep this black is. I'm starting to see a little noise here. And before I go further, let me just say, like, what is noise actually doing to your photo? It's removing contrast and making things a lot more flat. So I'm here looking at the 400, and I'm starting to see some noise creep in on the A7R V. And again, you start to kind of lose some contrast here. You can kind of see. As I look at the 4, I personally feel like the 4 is worse. And rightly so, because over the past 3 years, I would hope Sony has made great improvements in this. So the 4 does not look great. However, the 3 being a smaller megapixel camera, if I was to punch in, the noise looks really bad. But I personally have found that the 3 was better than the 4, and this is purely just like subjective. This is just my experiences. As I've gone through many different sessions, I think the 3 actually was a better low light camera than the 4. Let's look at the 800. Now at ISO 800, take a look at the leaf, into the pot, into the soil, into the dial. You start to kind of see we're getting pretty flat here. We're losing some of our depth at 800. And unfortunately, 800 is pretty low for what the camera can do. I mean, this camera goes up natively to 32,000. And by the way, there is no scenario I could ever see for myself to shoot that high. So it's almost gimmicky to push the ISO that far, in my opinion. But as we're at 800 here on the 5, it's starting to flatten out. On the 4, again, I think this is way worse. I think this is horribly worse than the 5. And the 3, being a lower megapixel camera, doesn't retain anywhere near the detail in this exact same settings, but the detail in the low light that the 5 is doing. So you can see how Sony made a lot of improvements, but you still can see the shortcomings in prior generations. 1600 here, let's take a look. Okay, now we're getting some discoloration in the noise. We're getting a very flat image. We're starting to lose our punch. That's again at a pixel peeping level though, because if I zoom out here, this is a great looking photo. And that's honestly one of the most important things when it comes to noise, is that if you're a pixel peeper, you're gonna find noise everywhere. But if you're not pixel peeping and you're posting this photo on Instagram or you're using it on your website, I don't know if you're gonna actually have a problem. But I personally, this is it for me. 1600 is about as high as I ever go, because as I'm getting further here, you're gonna see it's gonna get, in my opinion, pretty janky. Let's look at the A7R IV at 1600, not loving it. You're starting to lose all the clarity in the numbers. You're definitely getting super flat here. But again, if I zoom out, we're not in bad shape. A7R III. Again, you can definitely see how Sony improved the low light performance between the 3 and the 4. But again, I do think you get less noise on the 3, but I have no way to back that up, scientifically. So I've got the A7R V on the left and the A7R IV on the right. The dusty look has introduced itself on the A7R V, but not so much on the A7R IV. I'm actually a little surprised by this. As I look at these, they're very similar. I mean, I do feel like the A7R V, even though the noise is pretty significant at 1600, the text is still pretty sharp. Whereas on the 4, I feel like the text is a little softer on the dial. 3200, I can't think of a time where I've pushed to 3200, but let's look. Okay, we have got a lot of noise. I've got a super flat image. You can barely see the separation between the leaf and the pot at this point. And here's one other thing you start to find with Sony at a high ISO, and 3200 is only 10% of what the last ISO is at 32,000. You start to get a dusty look to the photo. You start getting these little white, like this right here, you see this? This little white speck? They're kind of all over the place. It starts to just look very dusty. So as you get higher, you get a dusty ISO. Yeah, babe, what's up? I'm talking about noise while my kids are like right over there. So, let her have a turn. Hey, you guys, be kind to each other and find a compromise. Okay, be kind to each other and find a compromise. Okay, continuing on here. We're at 3200. We're looking at the ISO of the 5. Let's look at the 4. And my God, I think it's so much worse as I look at the 4. The leaf just blends right into the pot. I can't even see the line anymore between the lens and the pot, unless I zoom out really far. And then the 3, again, not as bright. 6400, we're starting to get real crazy. See all the dust as I described the noise that's on the Sony system? We're at 6400 and this thing looks dusty, it looks dirty, and I personally feel that unless you're zoomed out completely, you're not pixel peeping, I think you can make this work maybe at 6400. I would love to hear your real world experience shooting at a high ISO like this. But as I'm pixel peeping, I mean, we are very noisy. I mean, look at this up here. Look at this shadow up here. And it's pretty gross looking. On the 3, do you notice how we don't really have the dust? Remember I was saying I think the 3 is better? So here's the 5, dusty, noisy. Here's the 4, worse. Look at, oh my gosh, that is so much worse. And then the 3, boom. This is the 3 at 6400. I'm gonna stand by this. I still think the A7R III might be the better low light performer. And by the way, I set this up, but I haven't gone through all these. I'm going through it with you, so this is my true reaction to this. Yeah, that's bad. That's worse. And that's not terrible. Okay, now, let's get to the ridiculous ISOs. Let's go to 12,800. Okay, yeah, we are really bad here at the A7R V. If you look here, you're gonna see we've lost almost all clarity in the lines to separate things. So, I mean, the leaf is looking bad into the pot, the dial's looking bad, the text is looking bad, and our photo looks super dusty and dirty. The 4, oh God, it's so much worse. It's so bad. There it is. There's the A7R IV in low light at 12,800, which again, I can't figure out who is shooting at 12,800 on the R system anyway. I wish they didn't even make that an option on these cameras. And then the 3, okay, the 3 is starting to get kind of dusty now, as the Sony sensors do. But honestly, if I had to shoot at 12,800 and I had to pick one of these cameras, I'm picking the A7R III. And then finally, the highest one they offer natively, 32,000. Look at this. It is completely speckled and washed over and washed out. No contrast. Dirty, dusty, no clarity, crazy amounts of noise. But again, if you're at only this size, you could probably make it work. The 4, yeah, it's so bad. Here's the 5, here's the 4, and the 3. Also bad. And the 3 starts to introduce color into the noise. I would say the 4 does as well. We start getting purple, green, and white specks. In the 4, same thing, kind of purple, green. You can really see it here. And then on the 5, it actually stays white. Okay, we've looked at the different ISOs, and you can scroll back, pause, make your own evaluation as you take a look for yourself. We looked at this together for the first time. I looked at it at the exact same time you did. So I would love to hear your analysis as well. I am no expert. Judging by some of the comments that I get on my videos, I think some of you think that maybe I think I'm an expert. That is not the case, and these are not scientific tests. They're just real world tests meant to show you what we've got to work with here. If you're a Sony shooter, I think if you have an A7R III, you can actually feel really good, because when it comes to noise, the A7R III is awesome. If you're a Sony shooter and you have the A7R IV or 4A, which is actually what this is, and you're trying to determine to yourself, should I upgrade to the 5? If you're doing so for low light, I think there is some merit to that, but I don't know if it's 100% the reason you should upgrade. And if you have the new A7R V, I think you will be as happy as you would have been with the 4 or the 3, maybe happier regarding low light. But low light is not why we have these cameras if we have the R system. Okay guys, thanks for watching today. I hope these videos are helpful and meaningful. I want to hear your analysis. You can leave that analysis right in the comments below. Thank you for watching. There's all the links down there. If you're not a subscriber, be sure to subscribe so you can become part of this community as well. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon.